So welcome to all. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on from where you are joining us today. We welcome you to another interesting event of our safeguarding series. We hope that those of you who have already joined in our previous webinar have gained some insight and eager to learn more about safeguarding, its key policies and minimum requirement. We hope to have another wonderful experience with you today. And let me introduce you myself and a bit about my organization. My name is Khurram Saeed. I am working as Program Coordinator, Quality and Accountability at Community World Service Asia. Community World Service Asia is a humanitarian development organization and registered in Pakistan and implementing initiative throughout Asia. Sorry, those of you who have joined, kindly please be muted or put your mic on mute so there is less interruption. CWS is a member of Core Humanitarian Standard Alliance and also the Sphere regional partner. In past, we have responded to many disasters in Asia and promoted Q&A tools, specifically the Sphere standard and the Core Humanitarian Standard for enhanced accountability to affected population. We are very pleased to be your host for today's webinar on web key policies and minimum requirement around safeguarding. This is the second webinar, as I mentioned in the opening statement, of our planned series on safeguarding. We will be having few other events also during the next year. So that will also build your understanding and your knowledge about safeguarding and its different aspects, key policy requirement for organization and organization commitment toward improving safeguarding at community level and at organization level. So hope to have most of you in the future webinars as well. We will keep you posted on the future ones, and those who have missed our previous webinar, they can find the recording on our website as well for their learning. If I may request Zainab to start the presentation so that I can go through some of the housekeeping rules, and then we can formally start the webinar. Zainab?
Just 2 minutes.
Okay. The webinar will be of 1 hour, 60 minutes, and it will be an interactive session. Initially, our facilitator will give some overview and some knowledge about the key initiatives and the policy requirement. Then we will have some question and answer with the participant. The webinar is being recorded, and hope this is fine with you, because we will use this recording for the internal purpose as well as posting on the website for others to take advantage from the discussion and from the experience shared during this webinar. Kindly put your mic on mute while you are listening other or the presenters. And we also request you to put the screen or the video option off and do not pin any video, so you remain focused on the slides and the discussion being held during the webinar. Next slide, Zanam. You can be active participant, and you can use the chat box while communicating with us or with each other. You may also use Q&A feature for posting your questions, or you can put your question in the chat box as well. We will provide you, depending on the time and availability, a session for the direct question and answers. So you can use that time as well. So hope to have you all with us, and thank you for those who have registered and shared some of the very interesting comments and questions already. We will try to discuss and try to address few of them as well during the webinar. So let me introduce you to today's presenter, Ms. Esther Dross. Esther is an accountability and safeguarding specialist with 30 years of experience with humanitarian development agencies, the IRC and the UN. She has extensive exposure to humanitarian certification system and accountability to affected population, and has been closely involved in the building safer organization project since 2005. So if you please all join me to welcome Esther. Esther, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Kuram. It makes me sound awfully old when I hear you speak about 30 years of experience. Welcome to all of you. I can see there's many are online, and welcome Pakistan, Afghanistan, and wherever you are calling us from. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Just a small correction on what Kuram just said now. I will actually give you some presentation, but I will also ask you to participate on, ask you some questions, because a lot of the things we are going to speak about, I think we know them already, so it's always good to get you participate, get your thoughts on these different topics so that we can progress together. And as Kuram said, we'll be together for more or less an hour, also a bit depending on your participation, of course, and active questions. So let me share my screen with you. I hope you can all see the screen. Well, good. So today, this is actually building up on the last session we had. I hope some of you have been able to be with us last time when we spoke more about general safeguarding, what it is and what it means for an organization to set up a safeguarding framework. So we had a couple of very interesting panelists speaking about their experience. Today, we want to dig a little bit more into concretely, practically, what does it mean for our organizations when we speak about safeguarding? What essential policies, what guidance do we need to have in place? What minimum essential guidance and policies we need to have to establish a safeguarding framework? And we agree that we're all on a voyage, on a travel, on a trip to an ultimate goal, which is creating safe environments, creating safe organizations for the people we work with and the people we work for. Can I just ask you quickly, you can use the chat, the ones who were with us last time, when we actually talk about safeguarding, what do we mean? How can we define that buzzword of safeguarding? Can I just give you 1 minute to go on the chat and maybe tell us what's your definition, what's your understanding of safeguarding?
Safeguarding means to protect and safeguard beneficiaries, particularly women, children, and vulnerable adults.
Thank you. This is Abdul Waida. Thank you. So you took the microphone. That's even better. Thank you very much. You're also welcome to take the microphone.
Yes, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Thank you. I can see on the chat protection of rights, protection of women and children, protection on, that's a bit different, of staff, beneficiaries, and stakeholders. Yes, Yasir says it's an environment where people can utilize their potential on the maximum safely and securely. Thank you very much. Shah Saman, safeguarding policies aim to protect all the staff and stakeholders from harassment and violation of major policies. Safeguarding is protection of children and women. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. You're all very awake this morning. That's nice to see. Protection from harm and damage with appropriate measures. Thank you very much. So something to go beyond just protection, isn't it? It is also about having appropriate measures, having, somebody was saying, policies in place. So when we speak about safeguarding, what we actually speak about is the responsibility of an organization to ensure that their staff, their own staff, as well as their operations, do not harm either children or adults. Very often we speak about child safeguarding, of course, but safeguarding is even beyond children. Anybody who is in contact with the organization works with the organization, or we work for them, so beneficiaries, community stakeholders. We want to ensure that our own staff, our own operations do not do harm to the people who are in contact with us. So it goes beyond protection. We do protect people. Some organizations very specifically protect children from specific harm. We have natural disasters. We have lack of schools, lack of water, so many protection issues. But here when we talk about safeguarding, we talk about ourselves, and I can see on the chat, no sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. Thank you. No harm. So this is what we mean by safeguarding. Thank you for your input to all of you. Now, again, I want to ask you, before I go ahead, what do you think, what are the key policies, as this session is about key policies and guidance? So we want to elaborate a bit more on that. But first, I want to hear from you. What do you think are the key policies, key guidance documents an organization needs to have in place when we speak about safeguarding, or when we speak about a safeguarding framework? What do we need to set up in order to say that we are a safe organization and we have policies in place to safeguard people? What are these policies? Yes, Shahid, please go ahead.
Yeah, before we go there, can you move the slide back? Because as we were discussing about the definition, it was also said by some colleagues that also about the assets. So, and when I see this definition, I can't see the this part about the assets. So can you explain on it?
About what?
The assets.
Oh, the assets.
Yeah.
Okay. You mean that we also want to protect our assets?
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, this is correct, huh? That this is also what we want to do. Now, when we talk specifically about safeguarding, I think usually we speak more about the people than our assets. But of course, it is something which is essential as well. You want to consider how you can protect your assets. And sometimes that's actually linked to protecting people as well. Huh? Anybody who wants? Yeah, thank you, Zaid. So you say also safety and security policies. Okay, you moved ahead to the next subject. Okay, who was it who had raised his hand? Was it Shahid?
Yeah, no, I just finished.
Oh, okay, that was for the assets. Okay, and we actually get to the assets because I can see in the in your chat you speak about code of conduct, policies for disciplinary, whistleblowing, harassment, safeguarding policy, partnership contracts, grievance, complaints, response mechanism, and Said is speaking about safety and security policy, code of conduct, and CRM. So thanks a lot. Can we say almost every policy? Thank you very much, Said. Probably we can, and you'll be happy to see that the safety and security comes back. Some organizations nowadays do actually include safeguarding as a responsibility of their safety and security officer. What is probably important there is to say when we speak about safeguarding, we still want to prioritize, of course, the people rather than our assets, but there is definitely a close link. So thank you for all your contribution. And I think you've resumed it well, Shahid, saying, can we speak about every single one of our policies? Probably yes, we can speak about nearly all of our policies. I think you've listed them all, maybe one or two which I've added. But yes, you have spoken about the code of conduct. Some organizations, in addition, have a safeguarding policy, others have a specific child safeguarding policy. We get back to these three just afterwards. Then you have spoken about CRM, so a complaints policy, a complaints response system, procedures. So obviously, as soon as we have a policy, we want to have procedures. Somebody spoke about. Can you please mute yourself? Sorry, can you? Okay, thank you. Some of you have spoken about investigation guidelines. Yes, clearly when we do have a policy which is regulating our behavior, we probably will have some issues raised, some complaints received through our complaints policy. So we also need to know how we then go about investigating these issues which are brought forward. So we need to have some kind of guidelines, which doesn't necessarily always need to be our own, written by ourselves. There is a few very thorough guidelines around. ACT Alliance, for example, has a guideline on investigations for its members, and I believe some of you are members to this network. CHS Alliance, the Criminal Standard Alliance as well, has a very extensive guideline on investigation. So not all of these policies need actually to be, policies and guidelines need to come from your own organization. Sometimes you can just adopt and adhere to something which exists. Something I haven't seen on your, yes, good morning, Fazel. I see that you have some internet issues, sorry to hear that. And now I have some issues with my presentation. Okay, here it is. So something I haven't seen on your chat box just before, what ideally safeguarding is also included in our recruitment procedure. So we'll get back more in detail to that just a bit later. And we'd also like to see that safeguarding is included, safeguarding responsibilities and commitments are included in job descriptions and obviously also working contracts. You have listed disciplinary guidance or policy, HR policies, etc. When we speak about code of conduct, we speak about maybe grievances or complaints, we speak about investigations. We definitely need to also address the issue of disciplinary action. And it's good if safeguarding issues are clearly included, in the disciplinary guidance and addressed, so people do know what is the potential disciplinary action in case of breach. And obviously what is useful as well is to have an implementation plan, an action plan, including partnerships and memorandum of understandings. So we will, I will show you at the end an example of such an action plan. And yes, good morning, Samina. It's nice to not see you again, but hopefully hear you again. So, Shahid is asking if safeguarding is a standalone policy or is this part of all the policies. Shahid, it will depend. It will depend on a lot on organizations. Some organizations do have a comprehensive safeguarding policy, plus a code of conduct, plus a child safeguarding policy. Others do have safeguarding policy as a standalone policy. What is important nowadays, I can also see some organizations work with what they call a safeguarding framework, where all these pieces and bits of policies are actually integrated in one framework. What is important is that all these issues need to be somewhere addressed in a policy, in a procedure, in a guidance document, so that it's clear, not just for ourselves, but for all the staff, but also for the communities we work with, what they can expect. What is the expected behavior? What is the way to raise issues? What will happen afterwards? How will we investigate this? How do we take it into account in our wider organizational aspects, such as recruitment and job descriptions? And then what is the disciplinary action if something happens? So it really depends a lot on the different organizations, if these are all separate policies or if we have a very long and wide policy where we include all of this in there. Good. Now let us move a little bit more to the not to all of these policies, but to some of the key policies, maybe to ask you what you think are the key elements or the key thematics which need to be included, addressed in this policy. So let me start about what we certainly see as the basis, the most important document policy we need to have is a code of conduct, or as some other organizations call it, a code of ethics, or either way, whatever we choose to call it, but definitely what is important is what is in it. So what do you think are the, and yes, I can see somebody who is asking if you will receive the slides of the session. You will receive the slides of the session definitely after. I think Kuram, you will put it on the platform or send it out to participants. Okay, so what are the essential chapters which we will need to include in our code of conduct, safeguarding policy, code of ethics? And what are the main behavioral rules maybe you want to absolutely have included there? Anybody wants to speak, or you can just use the chat again to tell us now, specifically speaking about the code of conduct, safeguarding policy. Okay, everybody should have space. Maybe you can elaborate, Subhash Maharaj, a little bit on this one. What else? What chapters, if you think about your own code of conduct, what is in there? Okay, space to share ideas, okay. Shahid, please go ahead.
Yeah, first, I think Subhash, if Subhash, anyone wants to speak, I think everybody, the floor is open to everybody. My question is regarding safeguarding, and you have right in the slide / code of conduct. So again, because I'm a bit confused here. So does that again mean that code of conduct is same as the safeguarding?
Okay, as I just said before, some organizations do have a safeguarding policy, which is actually including their code of conduct. Some have separate documents. So again, at the end, this is an organizational decision. If you have a code of conduct or a code of ethics plus a safeguarding policy, or you address the expected conduct inside a safeguarding policy, what is important is what is actually in there. What do you need to consider in a code of conduct, including safeguarding? What are the main behavioral rules you need to have included there? And I can see we have Yasir Khan, you have raised your hand.
Yes, basically in code of conduct being HR, it must be like safeguarding. We must include some basic rules or basic ethics regarding religion, that we must, if there is a diversity in the organization, we must respect the religion and we shouldn't talk about it. And if there is some person is specially enabled, so we must take care this inclusion and specifically these basic things regarding child protection and risk policy. We must make it part of the code of conduct, one thing. And behavior rule, somebody shared the like space. I used to say in all my trainings that do maintain your personal and professional space, because there is a thin line which normally people cross and get involved. Because when you share your personal things in the professional arena, you get confused and you are like sharing your weak points to others. And these are the things which create like cross the safeguarding limits. This is from my side.
Thank you very much, Yasir. Thanks a lot. I can also see that Masar Hussein online says that policy needs to define safeguarding. needs to have a list of prohibited behaviors as well as consequences. Thank you, Hussein. Then we have Mohammed Fahim, going back to the safeguarding policy, which is about procedures and practices employed to actively prevent harm, abuse, and distress. Yes, clearly. Anybody else? So maybe we can, I want to go back to what Mazhar Hussein says. Okay, you need to define safeguarding. Very good. Do we need to define anything else in a policy? And Shakila saying, yes, we need also to consider harassment, yes. So it's actually good if we define what we mean, isn't it? So safeguarding is defined as this, but then we also need to define the different behavioral rules, or exactly, thank you, Nabila. I was looking for my words. So we need to define what we actually mean by abuse. How do we define abuse? How do we define harassment? How you define exploitation? Maybe to come back to what you were just saying, Yassir, how do we define inclusion and discrimination? Certainly. Mazhar, yes, what is the different definitions around SEAH being sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment? Mohammed, yes, thank you. Mission statement, values, workplace. So it certainly should go back to what are our values. Conflict of interest, transparency, and accountability. So that would very much relate to the code of conduct in general. And then Nabila, yes, unwanted and wanted action should be clear. So we should be clear on what is expected behavior and what is prohibited. Because this will actually be the code of conduct and the safeguarding policies. These documents will be really what guides behavior and actions of our staff, but it will also be what guides how we go about complaints and what guides how we investigate. Because obviously to have a complaint which is receivable and do an investigation, the reproached behavior needs to be prohibited. Okay, some people have issues with the audio. So maybe you have to, Tariq, maybe you have to go push a button somewhere on your on your Zoom screen. So Gamar Iqbal saying this is about do's and don'ts. Yes, include people with disability. Yes, for sure. It's about having more on ethical expectations and for third parties as well. So lots of things. Huh? Some code of conducts are very extensive, but what you would certainly want to see in terms of protection of sexual exploitation and abuse and harassment, so safeguarding issues, is clearly we want to have definitions in there so that we all speak about the same, or that we know what the organization speaks about when it speaks about, for example, sexual harassment. And certainly, for example, the definitions of sexual harassment are quite different from one organization to the other, and sometimes from one context to the other. So what is important is that inside the organization, it's clear how we define, for example, sexual harassment. And Samina reminds us that community relationships need to be part of the policies. Yes, so we'll get into that just now. So definition is important. What is also important, and somebody talked about disciplinary action, we do need to link breaches of the code of conduct to work contracts and to disciplinary action. It needs to be clearly said in our code of conduct, code of ethics, or safeguarding policies that this behavior, such behavior, constitutes a breach, a violation of the code, and is linked to disciplinary action if it's substantiated. This is really important. I'm getting back to what Smina says on community relationships. So our code of conduct and our safeguarding policies definitely need to regulate either to regulate or to prohibit sexual relationship with different stakeholders. I've put it like this because there is different organizations do regulate differently sexual relationships. What certainly is clear is that 99.9% of organizations will prohibit sexual relationship with beneficiaries. When it comes to community members, this varies depending on the context of the organization. Sometimes it is prohibited, sometimes it's strongly discouraged, sometimes it needs to be declared. So that there can be some variations there, but it needs to be somehow regulated. And I've put different stakeholders because this is about community members and beneficiaries, but for some organizations, it will also be about other staff. Some organizations will actually regulate these relationships between staff members, depending on the hierarchy of staff members. Sometimes prohibited, sometimes needs to be declared. And Nabila reminds us that, of course, there needs to be a linkage in national policies as well. Our own policy can be of a higher standard than the national policy, but of course it cannot be of a lower standard. So whatever is prohibited in the national law is, of course, needs to be included. But our policy can be of a higher standard. So I take as an example, if, for example, in his one of the specific prohibitions of sexual relationship is about children, as we know, so no sexual activity with children, people beyond the age of 18. In some of the national policies, that might be lower, but for most of our organizations, we will stick to 18, even though that's higher than the national prohibition, and that is fine, as long as it's very clearly indicated and people know that this is the rule they have to stick to if they work for this organization. I have seen there were 2 hands up. Now I lost you. I think one was Yassir, and then there was somebody else. Yassir, please.
When you're talking about the relationship at workplace, it is very hard being HR to manage the discipline when 2 people are like in a relationship at workplace, because though it's a consented one, but I have 2 different experiences like in different organizations. In one organization, it was prohibited. It was not allowed, but when things went like in the investigation side, so and in final decision, we fired both of the staff because it was not allowed at workplace. Why? Because it's disturbing the whole environment. Because when one thing is not allowed and some people are doing it, it is ruining the discipline. But on the other in the other organization, there is a 360 different. They were like allow the relationship at workplace, but on a consent basis. But there is a policy that you need to report immediately, because when you don't report to HR that you have some relationship with that person, I'm not talking about the sexual relationship, I'm talking about the relationship for the longer run. So it will be clear to all the people that these 2 are in a relationship. But company to company, it varies. But generally, if we talk about the Pakistan, it's very hard. Being HR is very hard to control the environment in such situation.
Yeah, I agree with you, right? Not just on this, but even on others. Clearly, it is one thing to have the prohibition, and then it's actually how you implement it. And we agree that
exactly.
What is important in regards to regulating relationships between staff, and you're right, this is not just sexual, that can also be like, there can be conflict of interest or, very strong friendships. It's quite difficult to regulate this. And of course, that can have an influence on the environment, as many of us know, and we have worked in these kind of environments. So yes, it is important that there is a rule, but it's not so easy to implement the rule. Thank you for reminding us of this, Yassir. definitely what falls also under this this chapter of regulating or prohibiting sexual relationships, I was already mentioning the community members and the children, but of course this also includes any exchange of either services or food or work or anything else, including money, against sexual relationships. And so this is clearly a rule to protect the people at risk, like beneficiaries, people who look for a job, so that there is no potential sexual exploitation towards these people. And it's important that it's clear and that it's linked to disciplinary action as well. Good, so this is the prohibitions we would like to see. There's also some obligations. It's always nice to talk about not only what is prohibited, but maybe also how we contribute, all of us, to safeguarding people, to creating these safer environments. So clearly, many of the code of conducts will include an obligation to report any suspicion or incidents, so that taking into account that sometimes it's hard, and somebody put that on the chat as well. We all know that sometimes it is hard to raise an issue for many, many different reasons. We have many barriers, and sometimes it is really important that somebody who is observing, a bystander, is aware of his or her own obligation to report these kind of situations when we suspect that a child is exploited, a beneficiary is exploited, somebody is in a harassing work relationship with somebody else, so that these issues can be looked into officially. And Yasir, is that a new hand you're holding up?
Yes, when you talk about the reporting, it's very hard because generally the organization don't go for the training for the reporting side. Like if there is a complaint mechanism in the organization, you must train your staff that what is the procedure to report. Within the organization, outside the organization, when you replicate such trainings of a reporting mechanism, they must you can say replicate it in the community as well, that if they found anything, they must report, because normally and generally people used to inquire by themselves, that first I will judge and first I will assess that either it is right or wrong. So this is the way they like cross the thin line. So we need to train them at the organization level so that people can report. And second thing, people are frightened to report, because if there is a manager involved and subordinate know something, so it's very hard to report in this scenario, because when there is a frightening environment, when there is a you can say if there is a proper safeguarding measures taking place in that organization, people are and employees are much you can say easy to report things. But generally people are reluctant, because I have talked on this issue with different level in Pakistan. If we talk about harassment side, every university have harassment committees at their organization level, and it's a obligatory from the obligation from the government side that you must have a committee of harassment. But you will be surprised, there is not a single case registered, because people are reluctant. People are reluctant of their fame. People are reluctant of their they will be targeted. They will be punished, because generally practice who report get punished, and the victim is like wandering in a freedom way. This is what.
Yeah, thank you, Yasir. No, thank you. You've moved already ahead to the next chapter, but that's very good. And very important to remind ourselves that there's lots of barriers. And this is also why we have this obligation for third parties to report, because very often people are either they don't know how to report, sometimes they don't even know that this should be reported. I'm talking about community members, for example. Very often they have no access. We've already run some webinars on this, on complaints handling, and we'll do again another one next year. But so yes, there is all these issues with people not reporting, and that's why as staff, we need to understand what we need to report, maybe on behalf of somebody else, because that could be, that can be helpful to create a safer environment. And now I see that there's also a question on the chat I can see on investigation. So can I just tell you that we will get more into investigations and how to handle complaints in a later webinar. So please follow Community World Service website so that you can see when this will be programmed somewhere in January or February, where we go more into that subject detail. I have seen before, Shafiqullah, you have been holding your hand up, and then Muhammad Ayaz. So Shafiqullah, do you still have a question or a contribution?
I have just comments on the sexual exploitation, especially in Pakistan context. There is a very strict rules and regulations implemented by the government as well as the organizations. There are several rules are present there, but still the actions taken against the culprits are very low. And as I see in chat, there is the fear of job loss by the female and other so many intervention. So in the contest, so why the rules should not properly follow, and sometimes they compromise the case at their level, local level, or the organization level. So there is the fear of the organization reputation, or the reputation of the big boss or the managers.
Yeah. Thank you for sure. And we get back to the barriers. And Yasir is also reminding us we must give confidence to our staff to maintain confidentiality. There's a very clear link between trust building, confidence building, and confidentiality. This is for our staff, Yasir. It's also for the communities. We need to demonstrate that we have robust systems, that we deal well with complaints, that we do deal with them, that it's done confidentially. And we're all aware that this is rather difficult, but if we do it well, it will help us build trust, and trust will give more opportunities to people to come and report incidents because they trust that we'll do it well. And I completely agree with you, Qamar Iqbal, talking about reporting is easy, but practicing it is very hard. We know, I completely agree with you. It's so easy to speak on a webinar about why we should all report as whistleblowers, as victims, as survivors. And when we are in that situation, we all know how difficult it is, because I'm sure if I ask all of you, if you know a case when reporting has not gone as well as planned, you will all be able to give me a case. We all know about whistleblowers who get their contract terminated. We all know about victims who have been subject of victim shaming. Your name is all over the place. Some people will say, oh, these people are all liars. So we all have a lot of examples how it's not always dealt with well. And that's where we need to have, as an organization, we need to really make improvements. We have the policies, most of us, we have the procedures. We hopefully are building capacity, but then we need to deal well with these issues. So if the mechanism, as Nabila says, if the mechanism is strong, nothing is impossible. I completely agree. That's where we want to go. So maybe just to finish on the code of conduct, and then we go to the complaints policy. So we need to have key definitions. I will not read them again to all of you because we know these key definitions. They're the ones from the Secretary General's bulletin. Maybe just to draw your attention on sexual harassment. look at the definition in your national law, if you have a legislation on this, and look at your own definition in your code of conduct, because in some countries, sexual harassment is defined as a continuum of inappropriate, unwelcome, unacceptable behavior. And in some others, it is one single incident. So that is quite important, because that is quite different. And I know that at least in Pakistan, I know that you have a legislation on sexual harassment. So I would invite you to look at the definition there and maybe compare with your own definition. So the minimum key rules we want to see in a code of conduct in terms of safeguarding and sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment is to say that sexual exploitation, abuse, and sorry, I forgot to add, harassment is considered gross misconduct and therefore can lead to dismissal, of course. We want to see in there that sexual activity with children is prohibited, and children are anybody under the age of 18. Exchange of anything against sexual favors is prohibited, and sexual relationships between beneficiaries and staff are prohibited. These are usually the minimum key requirements organizations want to include in their code of conduct and safeguarding policies in order to be compliant with the Secretary General's bulletin and to be compliant with the IASC Interagency Steering Committee key commitments on sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. Now we've already talked about Yasir, you already talked about training, and Sadiqa Nouri as well speaks about training. Training is really important from the top level of the organization to the I don't want to say to the lowest level, but I rather want to say to all levels. Everybody needs to be included in training, including the communities. To be clear on how we define things. If we just say sexual exploitation is prohibited, I'm not sure a community member necessarily knows or understands what we mean by this. So it's important also to simplify the language, think through, and there will be another webinar where we want to speak a little bit about this, how we speak about sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment to our staff, to our management, to the communities, and how we need to adapt how we speak about it so that it's clear, everybody can understand what we speak about. That is a whole full chapter of work to be done. So training is really important. Once we are clear on training on expected behavior, on prohibited behavior, then we get into training people on complaints. What is a complaint? How we deal with complaints? How do people feel they can report safely? All this is important, needs to be covered in training, but we also need to demonstrate it as you said earlier, Nabila, if there is a will and if there is a strong mechanism, nothing is impossible. And this is really important to keep in mind that, yes, we can do that. It is quite a bit of work. It needs to be consistent through the years. It's not a one-off shot and then it's done. We'll need to repeat it all the time. We need to adapt it. We need to find ways of communicating better to everybody so that we can make progress. And Yasir, you wanted to say something.
To ensure it, we must ensure this material should be like visible in each offices and our community level. These like key rules and commitments, these all things must be in the local languages so people can understand. And the things you were talking about, how we communicate, so it will communicate like in a different manner. If we are training managers, we have different language, different words as per their understanding. If we talk like training field staff, entirely different. And when the field staff is training to the community members, there is an entirely like simple, soft, and to the point language. because when you talk these words in the community, they wouldn't bother you.
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
it's very hard to stay there.
Exactly.
And one more thing.
Go
and
ahead.
one more thing. And one more thing. And the complaint mechanism structure must be displayed in every office on the information board in a proper structure, the formal, the informal. So people who used to who want to complain, they can see and get what is the way. Because normally we have very low memory, we don't remember, because when we are in training or in any orientation, we have something more about our daily jobs in in our subconscious that is running. So people normally used to do this. So these are the things you must display at each level, office at community level.
Yes, thank you, Yasir. It's very important. And as you were saying, in training, and of course, for example, the PowerPoint presentation you have here, you could never use this in maybe with the committee, because you will think about how you speak about prohibitions, how you give examples, and you would definitely not use the wording we use here. So it's very important to adapt materials to the different, think about who is the audience, who we speak to, so that the message is appropriate. Now let us just quickly move to the complaints system, and as I said, we'll have a longer session on complaints again in I think it's in January. What's happening? But what we certainly want to include in the complaints policies and procedures, again, it's about definition. So we need to be clear on how we define a complaint. We certainly want to speak about anonymous complaints, how we address anonymous complaints. We want to explain about confidentiality and protection, as we've just seen, that is one of the main issues. So we definitely want to address this in our procedures and policies. We want to speak about whistleblowers in that policy. What happens to whistleblowers? How do we deal with whistleblowers? And we all, just to be sure that we all understand what is a whistleblower, is somebody who complains on behalf of a third party. So I'm not the victim, I'm not the survivor, but I have seen some inappropriate behavior, or I'm suspecting some exploitation and abuse. So I am reporting this through my complaint system, but I'm actually not the affected individual. And obviously whistleblowers need to be protected on the level of their identity and of any potential retaliation. In the complaints policy, and you've just said this, Yasir, this needs to be clear what happens, how it works, and it needs to be clearly communicated, not only to staff, but also to community members, to anybody who could be wanting to complain, so that they know exactly how it works. And again, as Yasir said, our memory is not always the best, so it is good if that is available somewhere quite visible. Somebody is not on mute. Can I ask you to go on mute? I think it's Abdul. I will mute you. Okay, so this needs to be available so that people can consult it and see how they should raise a complaint and what happens afterwards. Sometimes we do communicate really well on how we should raise a complaint, but we're not always very clear on what happens next. And this is an information which is important. I want to know who will get to know about my complaint, who will deal with it, because maybe there's some people I don't want them to know about my issue. So we need to be really transparent. And yes, thank you, Samina. Keep talking about policy on a monthly basis. Will be helpful to ensure a safeguarding environment. Yes, these topics should be something we talk about regularly. Our code of conduct, our behavior, our complaints policy, how we deal with issues. Do we get issues? How have we dealt with them, etc. This is not a secret. It's something we should get into a normal working reporting system. So it's something we take up regularly and not maybe only once every second year. So what also needs to be included in the policy, the complaints policy, is what is not the detail on what is the disciplinary action, but there will be disciplinary action. It also needs to include an appeals process. What happens if I am not happy with the outcome of an investigation after I've raised a complaint, or I can be the subject of the complaint? Is there an appeals process? How does it work? What do I have to do to make an appeal? And now we also start saying it should contain something on reference checks and vetting, and we get back to that just afterwards. Any specific comments on complaints policies and procedure? We don't want to go too much into detail, as we'll have a specific webinar later on this subject, but any important issue you want to add? Okay, then let us move on, conscious of time as well. Let us just quickly go into the recruitment. So I want to ask you again, on the chat or in person, when we talk about recruitment and safeguarding, what do you think needs to be included in the recruitment process, specifically now in terms of safeguarding? And there needs to be lots of things in the recruitment process, of course. But when we speak about safeguarding and improving our safeguarding systems, what do we need to include in this process of recruitment? I can see Yassir, you're a specialist of recruitment, I imagine, as an HR specialist.
Reference check is like main key to get the information about the future employee you are going to induct in your organization, and especially regarding safeguarding, that why this person is leaving from your organization, left your organization, and what was the overall behavior regarding safeguarding. So we get to know about from safeguarding, from reference check. And second thing, if we are hiring the support staff, we get the police report certificate, so we can get the detail of his criminal record. So these both things can help out in the recruitment process regarding safeguarding. Okay, so very good. So reference checks, serious reference checks, and of course not sometimes it seems like we're afraid to ask these questions, but yes, ask questions about why was this person leaving, and sometimes ask the question, has there ever been any issue for example, in terms of safeguarding, specifically when we want to employ somebody, for example, for working with children. Thank you, Yassir. And yes, police checks can be, it's not always easy in all countries, because if people move around internationally, for example, then you would want them to, there's no central database, so they would need to give you a police reference from each country, and some countries it might be a bit difficult, but it's certainly worth to ask for it, depending on what is the job you're recruiting for. Again, if it's a child protection officer, you would maybe want to ask for this specific police reference check, knowing that this would only of course only take into account issues which have been reported legally and which have been dealt with legally. So that would not be helpful in case of somebody who has maybe had a number of issues, but they've never been officially reported or officially investigated. But still, it doesn't hurt to ask for that. I'm just looking on the check. Experience.
Can I say something?
Yes, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. One thing, in addition of the points that has been discussed, is important to add a question in the interview evaluation questions to understand that how the employee or the upcoming employee responds to that question. We can understand that how respectful he or she is, and what is like their understanding and what they are suggesting for a safe environment in the organization. And another thing is, while we are recruiting the employee, so it would be good to have a disclosure form from the employee confirming that he or she has not been involved in any safeguarding violation issues, and was not like part of an investigation, or if any investigation happened, he or she was like able to contribute. So these are also like give us a picture that how is the employee while we are recruiting. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. This is very important. It's also, for example, sometimes asking, well, telling people that we have a very strict safeguarding policies and these are the rules and how do they see them. Sometimes gives you an idea of how people have already thought about or not safeguarding. And as you're saying, maybe a very specific scenario, how can we improve this situation, or what would you do in such a situation, gives you quite a lot of interesting information on the background of somebody. So thinking in recruitment to include some very specific questions on safeguarding is really interesting. And thank you, Mohammed, you're saying background check on media, on social media. Yes, that is sometimes interesting to go on the social media account of somebody and see what kind of things they publish, for example. I'd be very worried to see somebody publishing lots of pictures of young children, for example. That's just very extreme example, but that can be one way also to get additional information. And the disclosure form, thank you, Surah, that is also something which now more and more organizations will ask for. It is obviously a bit like the question when you get to the United States and they ask you if you plan to do a terrorist attack, you will always say no. But so same for safeguarding, people will most probably say no, I've never had any issues. But if something comes up later, you then have already one serious breach in the recruitment, where the person lied. So that is sometimes helpful in these cases. So to ask for people signing such a disclosure form is useful. Also ask people to sign that they agree that you ask safeguarding questions, for example, to former employers. That they have no issue with you asking these questions is helpful in countries where there is some privacy policies. So they actually do agree that you check on this. And if they don't agree, then you might reconsider your employment offer. What is also, I can see Jad Aftabi say, reference check mostly come with positive recommendations as compared to actual record with HR. They should be cross-checked through different means. Yes, now this is an issue. Reference checks, I think, and that is actually a point I have written here. It is good to be quite precise on whom should provide a reference, so that you avoid the reference from your former line manager who is your best friend. So very often you would say it doesn't need to come just from somebody from HR, but it needs to come from the HR director, or it needs to come from a senior representative, because you will know that these people would have had access to information if there was some worrying information on the person. So that we cannot just go around and ask our best friends to give a very positive recommendation on our behalf, but it's actually quite directive. Also, what is done more and more now is not just ask for a reference, but actually have a very elaborated questionnaire which is sent to these references so that they have to reply on some very specific question that takes more time. But again, to avoid that somebody just writes a very positive recommendation, as you're saying, Amjad, we've all seen that this kind of friendly recommendation, which is not necessarily helpful. So be maybe more precise in the obligation on who provides the reference and under which format. What also is now done because of all these safeguarding issues coming up is to actually do some interviews with people who have been providing reference checks, because it's also, of course, easier to just write quickly something than have a short interview with the person where you really ask to be a bit more precise and explain a bit more. Yes, and Samina asked about safeguarding policies directly. Yes, clearly, I think that's a question I really like to say. We have these policies. What do you think? How do you understand this? do you find that problematic? Is there anything, some people will effectively say this is about my private life and I don't want to work for an organization who has these kind of policies. Okay, then it's clear. Good. Thank you. And as Kemuddin Sirat is saying, yes, especially HR and direct managers, HR directors, because if there was an issue before, certainly at the level of the HR director, there should be some information on if there had been an issue. Now, what would you include? Because we will also speak about job descriptions. So what would you include into job descriptions in terms of safeguarding? Any ideas? Do you do this or not? And if you do this, what do you include?
One thing that we are including is that the organization has zero tolerance against the safeguarding violation and in the job description, and we expect everyone to abide the requirement.
Okay, yeah, very good. So zero tolerance, remind people that even at the level of the job description, and by the way, some organization, even at the level of announcing announcing a new position or a position to be filled in, they will add zero tolerance. Somebody has the, I will mute you. They will add the zero tolerance on SCA in the job description or in the vacancy announcement. Yes, Shah-Saman confidentiality is a good idea to include that into also contracts actually. And Abdul, please open your micro.
Yes, I want to add something that in this regarding we can add the designated safeguarding officer for this policy, zero tolerance policy, who act as the focal person for handling the complaints under any organizations and acknowledge receipts of complaints and coordinate meetings with organizations, safeguarding committees, and coordinate with to provide the feedback to complaint and accused as appropriate.
Yeah, thank you very much. So that wouldn't be on the job description, but globally, yes, it's certainly a good idea to have a designated safeguarding or safety, security, or however you want to call that person, have a specific designated position to look into these issues. Mohammed, you're raising your hand. Mohammed Bilal.
Yes, I wanted to also add that we could add to the job description about if they have prior training regarding the safeguarding issues in their organization or any sort of seminars like these. So that will also help. That will be a supplementary or complementary thing. That they could add. Yeah.
Excellent. Maybe more in the recruitment, but yes, so have they been trained is actually an interesting question. So that gives us information on our training plan, but it gives us also information if that person is already sensitized at those issues or not at all. Very important point. Thank you very much. I'm conscious of time, so maybe just to say it is pretty good in a job description to include the obligation to uphold safeguarding standards as a blanket. And if people have specific responsibilities working, for example, with children or with people at risk, then it's again good to include in the job description these safeguarding standards, but also the potential disciplinary action, just to remind, that's your job, and just to be reminded that if you do not uphold safeguarding standards, that is actually an issue and you might be dismissed. It is a way of reminding everybody about his or her responsibility. Good. And then, of course, all this needs to be included in some kind of action plan. I just want to show you very quickly It's just an example, huh? But it is good to think through to make all this happen. There's a lots of actions we need to do, and it's good to try to decide who is responsible of this action, how will we do it, and in which time frame will we do it. So, for example, if I take this action 14 is to draft a PSCA policy, including prevention and response to harassment policies. Okay, this is done by a consultant with no consultation, and this will happen in June. Okay, this helps us ensure that safeguarding happens and that it's clear who is responsible of what, under which time frame. It's always good to give ourselves very clear time frames to ensure that it happens really, because then we need to be, of course, accountable to these time frames. Good. I'm afraid we're at the end of our time together. I hope that has been helpful as a very quick introduction to what are the key policies, key guidance, and key thematics we need to cover when we speak about safeguarding. If we still have time, Khurram or Naila, probably, we have a very short, fun activity at the end with some questions for you to to fill in, and then we will close this session. Okay, so just we have some very short questions. Tell us what key behavioral rules need to be included in your code of conduct in terms of safeguarding, specifically for safeguarding. You can give, there is a multiple choice, so you can click different answers, several answers. Abdul Wahid, you can go on the poll and tell us what you think are key behavioral rules which need to be included in your code of conduct in terms of safeguarding. And there is several proposals. You can click on several of them. One is to include prohibition of sexual relationship with children. The second one is obligation to report. Third one is prohibition to use the organization's vehicle for private mileage. Then there is obligation to follow office working hours, prohibition of exchange of money against sexual activities, and wearing a t-shirt with the organization's logo. Obligation to be accountable for expenditures. And then we have the second question on how you define safeguarding. There is one single answer you should give us. And the third one is, what is a whistleblower? And how do you react to complaints you receive is the last question. Okay, let us just, we have 19 respondents. Let us reach 25 and then we'll close the poll. As I know, sometimes it's a bit difficult with the internet to reply to.
Excuse me, Miss Easter, I submitted the pool forms.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Can you see that or?
Yes, well, I cannot see yours, but I can see that quite a bit of people have participated. Thank you. So just maybe we can, you can still continue, but just to go quickly through. So what in terms of safeguarding do you need to include in your code of conduct? It's clearly you need to have a prohibition for sexual relationship, sexual activity with children. The famous obligation to report needs to be there, and the prohibition of exchange of money against sexual activities needs to be there. Obligation to follow office working hours or wearing a t-shirt with your organizational logo or rules around how you use vehicles would usually not be part of the safeguarding rules and obligations, but if you have rules for this, that would be more in your HR manual probably, or in your office guidance policy. Then there was a question how you define safeguarding. So I think a majority of you has said that safeguarding is that the organization has a set of policies and procedures in place to prevent and protect different stakeholders from sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. And that's what we have been talking about today. So thank you very much. That was the correct answer. Whistleblower, I think the majority of you have said that this is a person who reports suspicions or facts with regards to sexual misconduct as a third party. So this is not a person who has been abused or a person who just reports everything which they observe, but this is actually about suspicions or facts with regards to sexual misconduct and code of conduct. And this is not the victim or survivor, but it's a third party. Then we had some questions on how do you react to complaints you receive. I'm happy to see that the majority of you are saying we always handle them because we are accountable to the people we work with and for. This is really important. And it's connected to the other answer I gave you, which also the majority has said, yes, this is, we never disregard a complaint, even seemingly unimportant, because we have a duty to respond to all complaints. There are big complaints and there are rather small complaints. It's important to always respond to all complaints. This is also how we build trust. No? If we say we have too many complaints, so therefore we stopped handling them, that's certainly not a good way to create trust. No? I can see Shakila, you ask, is a whistleblower a third person or can she be a victim? Well, if it's the victim, we actually talk about the complainant. So complainants obviously also have the same right of protection and non-retaliation, but we wouldn't use the term whistleblower in that case. And there was a last question on how you react to the complaints you receive. No, that's, I've already addressed that, so sorry. So we always deal with all the complaints. That is very important. So we'll speak more about complaints. I don't remember when, somewhere in January. If you're interested, please sign up on this next webinar on this. And yes, Naila will share the PowerPoint presentation from this session with pleasure. I'd like to thank you for, we've gone a little bit over time. I'm sorry, but there was very active group. So thanks for a very active participation. I hope that's been helpful, that you've got some additional information on how to deal with these safeguarding issues. It's been a pleasure having you on the call, speaking to all of you, and we well, we'll meet again, I think, maybe not in person, unfortunately, but as always on the Zoom link. It's a pleasure speaking to you and wishing you a good end of year holiday for the ones who are off. Thank you a lot, and bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Easter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice end of the day. Yeah? And you will get the PowerPoint, no problem. I will harass Naila until you get the PowerPoint. Thanks a lot.
Also, Ms. Issa, could we have the PowerPoint anyway? Is it possible?
Yes, you will get the PowerPoint, and I can see that we still might have some questions we want to maybe address then afterwards in a document, but you'll certainly get the PowerPoint presentation.
Thanks a lot. That would be helpful.
I can actually even try to attach it here. Let me see if I can even attach it here on the chat for the ones who are still online. Okay, so for the ones who are still here, I've just put it on the chat, so you can download it from the chat. And for the ones who can't, Zainab will share it afterwards with you. So thank you very much. Have a happy day, and we'll hopefully see you again online in January. Thanks a lot.